Kyle was just an ordinary mechanic in a small, quiet town. His life was simple, often monotonous, and he was used to long hours spent working in his dusty garage. The town itself was old, with a faded charm, but not much else. It had seen better days, and so had Kyle. He wasn't rich or particularly well-known. In fact, most people barely took notice of him. But Kyle didn't mind. He had his routine, and for him, that was enough. One evening, as the wind turned chilly and the sun began to set, Kyle was cleaning up after a long day's work. The hum of a vehicle engine faded as the last customer of the day left the shop, and Kyle grabbed a rag to wipe his hands. He was looking forward to a quiet night in his small, cluttered home, with nothing but a warm meal and maybe a good book to keep him company. As he turned to head inside, his eyes caught two figures sitting near the dumpster just outside the shop. It was strange seeing anyone out there at this time of day. He squinted in the dim light, trying to make out who they were. Two young girls hunched over and wrapped in thin, torn clothes. They were shivering, their faces pale from hunger. They looked out of place, as if they didn't belong in a town like this. Kyle hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. He wasn't exactly known for being social, and he wasn't used to dealing with people in need. But something about the sight of them tugged at his heart. He sighed, wiped his hands on his coveralls, and walked over to them. The girls didn't seem to notice him at first. They were too focused on the cold, their heads bowed as they tried to keep warm. Kyle stopped a few feet away from them, clearing his throat. "Hey, you two okay?" he asked softly. The older of the two girls, who couldn't have been much older, then 16, looked up at him with wide, cautious eyes. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her long hair was tangled and matted. The younger girl, barely more than 10, had her head down, clutching her knees to her chest as if trying to make herself as small as possible. The older girl nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're fine. Just cold." Kyle could see the truth in her eyes. They weren't fine. They were hungry, tired, and lost. The sight made him uncomfortable. He was used to fixing things, machines, metal, engines, things that didn't need emotions or compassion. But these girls needed something he wasn't sure he could provide. "I can't just leave you out here like this," Kyle muttered to himself. "Come on, I'll get you something warm." The girls exchanged a glance, and the older one seemed hesitant. But after a moment, she stood up slowly. "Thank you," she said quietly, as if she didn't believe he would actually help. Kyle didn't think twice. He led them inside his garage, where a small kitchenette sat in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a meal. He opened his cupboards, pulling out some canned beans and rice, things that didn't require much preparation. He heated the food on the small stove, keeping his back turned to the girls as he worked. The sound of the can opener was loud in the quiet room, breaking the silence. The younger girl moved cautiously toward the small table, her eyes scanning the room. Kyle could tell she was hungry, but she seemed too shy to ask for the food. He set a bowl of warm beans and rice in front of her, and she hesitated for a moment before diving in, her hands trembling slightly as she ate. The older girl sat at the other end of the table, looking at her food but not touching it right away. Kyle noticed her gaze linger on the small meal, and he could tell she was thinking, wondering if it was even real. Finally, she looked up at him. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Kyle shrugged, not really sure himself. "I don't know. Just seemed like the right thing to do." They ate in silence for a while, the warm meal making a huge difference. Kyle watched them both, feeling a sense of strange comfort in their company. It wasn't like him to do something like this, but he couldn't deny the satisfaction that came with helping someone in need. As the meal came to an end, the girls seemed more relaxed, their earlier tension melting away. The older girl spoke again, her voice slightly stronger. We don't have anywhere to go. Do you mind if we stay here tonight? Kyle hesitated, glancing at the small space around them. It wasn't much, a dusty, cluttered garage with just a bed in the corner, but it was warm, and it was safe. You can stay, just for tonight. I don't have much room, but it's better than the cold. The younger girl smiled, her eyes lighting up. Thank you, she whispered. As the night went on, Kyle found himself sitting with them, talking absting soft beams of gold across the dusty floor. Kyle awoke to the sound of soft breathing. At first he thought he was imagining it, but then he realized that the girls were still in the small bed he had set up for them. Lyra and Naya had stayed the night, and though the situation felt unusual, Kyle wasn't bothered by it. It felt right to him, as if they had found a temporary home, however small and humble it might be. He stretched and rubbed his eyes, taking a moment to appreciate the calm of the morning. It had been years since he had shared his space with anyone, and though he was used to solitude, he wasn't sure he wanted to return to it just yet. The quiet presence of the girls had made the night feel different. It wasn't uncomfortable, but there was an undeniable sense of change in the air. As Kyle moved around the garage, he noticed Lyra stir. She sat up slowly, her eyes squinting, against the morning light. The younger girl, Naya, was still asleep, curled up tightly on the makeshift bed. Kyle didn't want to disturb them, but he also needed to get some work done. He turned to Lyra and offered a small smile. "Good morning," he said gently, his voice a little rough from sleep. Lyra blinked, her expression softening. "Good morning." She looked around, taking in the simple surroundings. "I'm sorry for taking up your space," she added, her voice quiet but sincere. "We didn't mean to make things difficult." Kyle waved off her apology with a chuckle. "It's fine. You needed a place to stay. I'm happy to help." He paused for a moment, then added, "Besides, it's been a long time since I've had company. I'm not complaining." She smiled faintly at his words, though her eyes seemed to carry some unspoken weight. It was clear that there was more to her story than she was letting on. But Kyle didn't push. He wasn't the kind of person to pry into other people's business unless they were ready to share. The morning was spent quietly. Kyle cooked some eggs and toast, offering a simple breakfast to the girls. They ate together in the small kitchen area, and for the first time in a long while, Kyle found himself enjoying the company. Naya was the more talkative of the two, asking questions about the town and about the kinds of repairs Kyle did. She seemed fascinated by the tools and machines that filled the garage. Kyle answered her questions as best as he could, happy to share his knowledge. He was used to explaining things to customers, though most of the time they weren't as interested in the details. But Naya listened with rapt attention, and it made Kyle feel a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a while. Lyra, on the other hand, was quieter, her gaze often drifting out the window as if she were watching for something, or someone. Her silence wasn't awkward, but it was heavy, as if she was waiting for something to happen. Kyle noticed the way she kept glancing at the door, as if expecting it to open at any moment. But nothing happened. The town remained the same, quiet and unchanged, just like it had been when Kyle first met the girls. As the day wore on, Kyle found himself thinking more and more about their strange arrival. Who were they really? Why had they ended up in his town with no belongings and no place to go? There was something about them that didn't quite add up. It wasn't just the way they looked. There was something in their mannerisms, something distant and otherworldly, as if they didn't quite belong to this world. Kyle had a feeling that there was more to them than they were letting on. He didn't know if he was being paranoid, but something deep inside told him that these girls were special, that their story wasn't as simple as it appeared. After breakfast, Kyle went to work on a nearby engine, trying to focus on the task at hand. But his mind kept drifting back to Lyra and Naya. They hadn't said much about themselves, but Kyle could sense that they were hiding something. He wasn't sure if they trusted him enough to share the truth, but he could feel their walls. They were built high and strong, but he didn't want to push them. Not yet. Naya wandered around the garage, looking at the various tools and machines with fascination. She seemed to enjoy being in the space, her curious nature bringing a sense of life to the otherwise quiet shop. Every now and then, she would glance over at Kyle, her eyes full of wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe she was in a place like this. Lyra, on the other hand, stayed close to the window, her eyes scanning the street outside. She seemed almost anxious, as if waiting for someone or something. Kyle couldn't help but wonder what she was looking for, but he didn't ask. Around noon, they decided to take a walk through the town. Kyle showed them around, pointing out the old diner, the market, and the local park. The town was small, with a few dusty streets lined with run-down buildings, but there was a sense of peace about it. It wasn't much, but it was home. Lyra and Naya seemed to enjoy the walk, though Lyra's attention kept returning to the sky, her eyes tracing something unseen. Kyle noticed her unease but said nothing. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but it felt as if she were waiting for something to happen, or perhaps she was hoping it wouldn't. When they returned to the garage, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The girls settled back into the bed, and Kyle went back to his work, but his thoughts continued to linger on them. He couldn't shake the feeling that their presence here was no accident. Something was drawing them to him, and he didn't know what it was. But whatever it was, he had a feeling it would change his life forever. As the night fell, Kyle couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. The questions were piling up in his mind, but he still didn't have any answers. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure if he wanted them. The days that followed were filled with a quiet rhythm. Kyle continued with his work, fixing vehicles and machinery, while Lyra and Naya spent their time in the garage, helping where they could. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small family, a sense of comfort that Kyle hadn't realized he was missing. The sound of tools, clanging, and the hum of machinery blended with the occasional laughter of Naya, who seemed to brighten every moment. Lyra remained quieter, watching the world outside more often than joining in, but her presence was reassuring in its own way. Kyle had never been the type to ask many questions. His life had always been about simple routines and staying out of other people's affairs. But the more time he spent with the girls, the more he wondered. They were unlike anyone he had ever met. Naya's innocent curiosity and Lyra's calm but watchful demeanor spoke of experiences far beyond the small town they now called home. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Kyle was cleaning up after finishing some repairs on an old truck. He wiped his hands on a rag, taking a deep breath to clear his mind. When he Nota was finally ready to talk, he wasn't sure if he was ready to hear it. He had spent the last few days pretending everything was normal, but now it felt like something big was about to unfold. Lyra took a deep breath. "We're not from around here, not from this planet, not from this galaxy." Her words were slow, careful, like she was measuring every syllable. "We're not humans, Kyle. We come from a place far away, somewhere beyond the stars." Kyle blinked, his mind racing to catch up with what she was saying. He'd suspected there was something different about them, something that set them apart from the ordinary world he knew. But the idea that they weren't human, that was something he wasn't sure how to process. I don't understand," Kyle said, his voice filled with confusion. "You're saying you're aliens?" Lyra nodded, her gaze steady but distant. "Yes. We were sent here for a reason. We didn't come by choice. We were part of something bigger, something important." Kyle ran a hand through his hair, still trying to absorb what she was telling him. Why me? Why did you come to me? Lyra's lips parted, but she seemed to struggle with the answer. Because of you, Kyle. Because of something you did. Something small. Something simple. But it meant more than you could ever imagine. He frowned, his mind going back to that first night when he had given them food and shelter. Was that it? Was that the reason they had come to him? He didn't understand how something so small could lead to this. It all felt like a dream. Something that didn't quite fit into the life he knew. I don't get it, Kyle said quietly. You're telling me that I'm part of some bigger plan? How? Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes flickering toward Naya before turning back to Kyle. It's not just about you helping us. It's about what we represent. We've been searching for someone who could help us with what's coming. And now that we've found you, we can't go back. We've been looking for a human who could help us, and we thought we might never find him. Kyle's heart was racing now. He had been part of something, he realized. Something much larger than he ever imagined. But what did that mean for him? And why had they chosen him? He was just a mechanic, a quiet, ordinary man living in a small town. What could he possibly do to help them? Why me? He asked again, his voice thick with disbelief. I'm nobody special. I'm just a guy who fixes cars. Lyra's gaze softened and she stepped closer to him. You're not just anybody, Kyle. You've been chosen because of your kindness, your ability to care. The world we come from, it's dying, and we need help. Not just from anyone, but from someone like you. Kyle took a step back, his mind spinning. It was hard to comprehend everything she was saying. He had always thought of himself as ordinary, invisible even. But now, it felt as if the whole universe was opening up to him in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. Lyra's eyes held, his unwavering. There's a war coming, Kyle, and you're a part of it now, whether you want to be or not. Kyle stood in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. His life had just changed forever. The path ahead was unknown, filled with dangers and promises he couldn't yet understand. But there was no going back. The truth had been laid bare before him, and somehow he knew this was just the beginning. Kyle couldn't shake off the weight of Lyra's words. She had told him the truth, though it felt like a dream. How could he possibly be part of something so much bigger than himself? He was just a mechanic. His life had always been about fixing things, about putting things back together. But now the world he had known seemed so small, and everything he thought he understood was beginning to unravel. That night, Kyle lay in his bed, staring up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The thoughts were swirling in his mind, faster and faster, until they all blurred together. Lyra and Naya weren't just girls who needed help. They were from somewhere far beyond Earth, and they had come for a reason that involved him. But what did that mean for his future? Outside, the sounds of the quiet town were broken by the occasional car passing by. It was the same rhythm Kyle had always known, but now it felt like he was living in a different world. The town was still the same, but he wasn't. His thoughts kept returning to Lyra. She had said something about a war coming, about him being part of something bigger. But how could he help them? What could he possibly offer? The next morning, Kyle went about his usual routine, though his mind was far from the work at hand. Lyra and Naya were still in the garage, though he could tell that Lyra was troubled. She kept to herself more than usual, her eyes always scanning the horizon, watching for something that Kyle couldn't see. Naya, on the other hand, seemed more upbeat, her usual curiosity never fading. She asked questions about the machines in the garage, about the way engines worked, and Kyle found himself answering her with more enthusiasm than he'd expected. But the weight of Lyra's words still lingered in the back of his mind. Every time he glanced at her, he saw the same sense of urgency in her eyes, as if time was running out. As the day wore on, Kyle couldn't keep quiet any longer. He needed answers. He needed to understand what was happening and what role he was supposed to play in all of this. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light across the garage, Kyle turned to Lyra. She was standing by the window again, her gaze distant. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Lyra," he said softly, "I need to understand more. What exactly is this war you're talking about? What's coming?" She turned to him slowly, her face lined with the weight of the secrets she was carrying. She glanced at Naya, who was busy sorting through some old tools, and then back at Kyle. For a long moment there was only silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a war that's been brewing for centuries, Kyle. Our world, our people, are caught in the middle of it. There's an enemy out there, a force we've been trying to stop for a long time. They want to destroy everything, not just our world, but countless others. We've been fighting them for as long as I can remember." Kyle's stomach tightened as he listened to her. It all sounded so unreal, like something from a story, not something that could actually be happening. "But how does that involve me? I'm just a mechanic. I don't know anything about wars or about whatever it is you're talking about." Lyra's gaze softened. "That's what we thought, too. At first. But the truth is, Kyle, you've always been a part of this. You just didn't know it." Kyle frowned. "I don't get it." She walked over to him, her footsteps measured and steady. "When we came to Earth, we were following a lead, a clue that had been passed down through generations, a prophecy, if you will. It said that a human would play a key role in our victory, someone who was kind, who could understand the value of life, who could bring together forces from different worlds. Someone like you." Kyle felt the weight of her words press down on him. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or to run. But something inside him told him that this wasn't a joke. Lyra wasn't lying. There was something about him, something she believed in, that could help them. "But how?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "How can I help? I don't even know what I'm supposed to do." Lyra met his eyes, her expression unwavering. "You don't need to know everything right now. All you need to do is trust that you're not alone in this. Naya and I, our people. We've been fighting this war for so long, and we've lost so much. But with you, we might finally have a chance." Kyle took a deep breath, trying to make sense of what she was saying. He had always prided himself on being practical, on solving problems with his hands. But this was something he wouldn't fix with tools or a wrench. It wasn't about repairing things anymore. It was about survival, about saving lives, perhaps millions of them. He looked at Naya, who was now standing nearby, watching him with wide, trusting eyes. Her innocence made the situation even harder to believe. She had so much faith in him, and he had no idea how to live up to it. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Kyle admitted, his voice low. "I'm not some hero. I'm just me." Lyra took a step closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's exactly why you were chosen, Kyle. You don't need to be anything other than who you are. Sometimes the smallest actions can have the biggest impact." Kyle stood in silence, the weight of the decision settling into his chest. He didn't know what to do or where to go from here. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. He looked at Lyra, then at Naya, and made a quiet promise to himself. He wasn't sure how this journey would end, but he knew he wasn't going to face it alone. The days that followed were filled with questions and uncertainty, but Kyle had made a decision. He had promised himself that he would try to help, even if he didn't fully understand what was at stake. Lyra and Naya seemed to believe in him, and their trust made something inside him stir. Maybe he wasn't just a mechanic after all. Maybe there was more to him than he'd ever realized. Kyle had always been a practical man. He knew how to fix things, how to make the broken work again. But what Lyra had told him was not something that could be fixed with tools. It was something bigger than anything he'd ever dealt with. A war, a prophecy, an enemy that threatened more than just their world. But how could someone like him be a part of something so grand? Each morning, Kyle woke up early, his mind still racing with the questions from the night before. He knew Lyra and Naya were right. Time was running out, but he still didn't know how to move forward. Every time he looked at Lyra, she seemed to be carrying a burden far heavier than he could imagine, and Naya, with her innocent curiosity, didn't fully grasp the weight of their situation. She seemed to think everything was just another adventure, another journey to explore. But to Kyle, it wasn't an adventure. It was a challenge, a fight for survival, not just for them, but for everyone. The thought of it weighed on him more and more each day. He wasn't sure if he was ready for it, but what choice did he have? Lyra had said they needed him. He couldn't walk away from that. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip, casting a golden glow over the small town, Kyle found himself standing beside Lyra in front of the garage. She had been quieter than usual, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if waiting for something. Kyle had noticed that she often did this, looking out into the distance as though she expected an enemy to appear at any moment. "Lyra," Kyle said, breaking the silence, "I know I'm supposed to be a part of something bigger, but I don't know how to help. I don't have any special skills, nothing that makes me stand out." Lyra turned to him, her expression softening. "You don't need special skills, Kyle. You have something more important. You have a heart, and sometimes that's all we need." Kyle stared at her, trying to understand. "A heart?" "Yes," she replied. "Your kindness, your ability to care for others, it's something we need. There are others out there who are lost, just like Naya and I were. And we need someone who can bring them together, someone who believes that they can make a difference. That's why we came to you." Kyle was silent for a long moment. He wanted to believe her, but the doubts kept creeping in. Could he really make a difference? Could he really be a part of something that could save so many lives? He glanced at Naya, who was sitting nearby, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. She looked up and smiled at him, her innocence shining through. It was hard to believe that such a young girl could be involved in something as dangerous as what Lyra had described. But there was a light in her eyes, a spark of hope that Kyle couldn't ignore. If Naya could believe in him, maybe he could, too. "I don't know if I can do this," Kyle said quietly. "But I can't just sit here and do nothing. I won't let you down." Lyra smiled, a small but sincere smile that seemed to ease some of the tension in the air. "You won't be alone, Kyle. We'll do this together. You'll see. You're stronger than you think." That night, Kyle couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what Lyra had said, about the prophecy, about the role he was supposed to play in this war. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to push away the fear and uncertainty that clung to him. He had always been content with the quiet life he had, fixing engines and living in his small, familiar world. But now, that world had changed, and he wasn't sure if he could keep up. The next morning, Lyra and Naya were ready to leave. They had a plan, or at least they had an idea of where to start. They needed to find more people, people who were part of the larger resistance, people who could help them in their fight. Lyra had told Kyle that they had allies out there, scattered, across the world, waiting for someone to lead them. "Where do we go first?" Kyle asked, his voice filled with both uncertainty and determination. "We have a contact," Lyra replied. "A group that can help us, but it's not going to be easy. The enemy is always watching. We'll need to be careful." Kyle nodded. He didn't know what to expect, but he was ready to take the first step. He couldn't keep living in the shadows of his old life. He had to do something, even if he wasn't sure what that was yet. As they prepared to leave, Kyle felt a mix of emotions. Fear, excitement, confusion, and something else. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was a fragile hope, but it was there. Maybe he wasn't just fixing engines anymore. Maybe he was part of something that could change the future. With one last look at his small garage, Kyle turned toward Lyra and Naya. He was no longer just the mechanic from a quiet town. He was part of a much larger story. And as he followed them into the unknown, he knew that his life would never be the same again. The following morning, Kyle stood in the middle of his garage, the familiar tools surrounding him. But everything felt different now. The garage that had once been his safe, quiet space seemed smaller, almost insignificant compared to the vast unknown he was about to enter. He had never imagined that the simple act of helping two strangers could lead him to a path like this. But now, it was his reality. Lyra and Naya had been preparing for their journey all morning, packing up what little they had. The Starship, the one that had appeared outside Kyle's door a few days ago, was waiting for them just outside the town. It had been hidden from view during the night, but Kyle knew that once they left, there would be no turning back. He couldn't pretend he was still the man who only fixed cars and worked in solitude. His life had changed in ways he wasn't sure he could ever fully understand. Lyra walked over to him, her eyes steady, as always. "We need to leave now," she said softly. "It's not safe to stay here for too long." Kyle nodded, trying to push away the nervousness he felt. "I'm ready, but I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. I still don't understand all of this." "You don't need to understand everything right away," Lyra replied. "You're doing the right thing by coming with us. That's enough for now." Her words helped ease some of the tension in Kyle's chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the journey ahead, but he trusted Lyra. She had shown him a strength he hadn't known existed in someone like her. And Naya, she had a kind of innocent bravery that made Kyle believe, just for a moment, that everything might be okay. The walk to the Starship felt long, even though the ship was only a few blocks away. The streets of the small town were quiet, as they always were. People went about their day, unaware of the life-changing journey that was about to unfold. Kyle kept his eyes on the ground as he walked, unsure of what to expect. He had been told that they would be meeting others, people who could help them, but he didn't know who they were or what they would be like. When they reached the outskirts of town, Kyle saw the ship for the first time in full. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. The sleek, metallic surface shimmered in the light, reflecting the sky above. It looked both alien and familiar, like something from a dream. There was no doubt that this was no ordinary vehicle. The ship was far beyond anything Kyle could have ever imagined. Lyra and Naya climbed aboard, and Kyle followed them, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he had made the choice. This was his path now. Inside the ship, everything was much larger than Kyle had expected. The walls were lined with technology that was unfamiliar to him. Controls, screens, and buttons that seemed to pulse with life. It felt like stepping into another world. Kyle was in awe, but he quickly reminded himself that he wasn't here to marvel at the ship. He was here for a reason, and he had to focus. Lyra led him to a small room toward the back of the ship, where a woman was waiting. She was tall, with sharp features and a calm, collected expression. Her dark eyes regarded Kyle carefully, sizing him up as if trying to gauge how much he could be trusted. "This is Captain Zira," Lyra introduced. "She's the leader of the group we've been looking for." Kyle offered a hesitant smile and extended his hand. "Kyle, I'm not sure how much help I'll be, but I'm ready to do what I can." Captain Zira shook his hand firmly, her gaze never leaving his. "We'll need all the help we can get," she said. The war we're fighting is unlike anything you've ever known. We're facing an enemy that has already destroyed countless worlds. The stakes are higher than you can imagine." Kyle swallowed, his stomach tightening. He had known it wasn't going to be easy, but hearing the weight of the words made it all feel real. "What do we need to do?" he asked, his voice steady, though he was feeling the pressure. "We need to gather our forces," Captain Zira replied. "There are others, scattered across this world and beyond, who are fighting the same enemy. Some of them are already organized, others are just beginning to find each other. Our job is to bring them together. You'll be part of that effort." Kyle nodded slowly, trying to absorb everything she was saying. "And how do we do that?" "By reaching out," Lyra answered. "By showing them that there's hope. There are people out there who don't even know they're part of this fight. Yet, they're waiting for someone to lead them. That's where you come in, Kyle. You have the ability to unite them." He felt a sense of responsibility settle on his shoulders. It was overwhelming. But there was a part of him that felt a strange sense of purpose. He had always wanted something more from life, something that went beyond fixing engines. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the meaning he had been searching for without even knowing it. As the ship began to move, Kyle looked out the window, watching as the town shrank away below them. He had left behind everything he knew, but he wasn't alone. Lyra and Naya were with him, and so was Captain Zira. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he was part of something important, something that could make a real difference. The stars stretched out before them, a vast expanse of possibilities, and Kyle realized that his journey was just beginning. There was a war to fight and a world to save. But he wasn't afraid. He was ready. The days turned into weeks, and Kyle found himself growing more accustomed to life aboard the starship. At first, everything had seemed overwhelming, the unfamiliar. Technology, the constant motion of the ship, and the vast open space that stretched beyond the windows. But with each passing day, Kyle felt a sense of purpose growing inside him, something he hadn't felt before. Lyra, Naya, and Captain Zira had shown him what it meant to be part of something much larger than himself. They had given him a purpose. And that purpose was to help save countless worlds from an enemy that threatened everything. They traveled across the stars, visiting different places, meeting different people. Some were allies, eager to join the fight. Others were hesitant, unsure of what to believe. But Kyle had learned that his role wasn't to lead with force or power. It was to lead with kindness and understanding. It was his ability to connect with people, to show them that they were not alone, that made him valuable. Time and time again, he had seen how a simple act of compassion could turn the tide in their favor. He was beginning to understand what Lyra had meant when she said that he had been chosen because of his heart. One evening, as they traveled through deep space, Kyle sat quietly in the common room of the ship. The stars outside were just pinpricks of light against the endless black, and the hum of the engines was the only sound filling the room. He had been thinking about the people they had met during their journey, people from all walks of life, from different corners of the universe. Some had joined their cause, some had turned away. But there was one thing that remained constant: the need for hope. Everywhere they went, people were searching for something to believe in, and Kyle had realized that, more than anything, that was what they needed. They needed someone to show them that they could still make a difference. Kyle's thoughts were interrupted when Lyra entered the room. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment they simply stood there in silence, both looking out at the stars. It was a peaceful moment, but there was still so much to be done. Kyle had grown close to Lyra during their journey. She was no longer just the mysterious girl he had helped so long ago. She had become someone he trusted, someone who had shown him a world far beyond what he had ever imagined. "You okay?" Lyra asked, her voice gentle. Kyle nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he was. I've just been thinking about everything, about how much we still have left to do. It feels like we've barely scratched the surface. Lyra sat down beside him, her gaze turning toward the view of the stars. I know, but we're getting closer. Every day, we're one step closer to the people who need us. Every person we bring into this fight brings us closer to victory. We just have to keep going. Kyle smiled, grateful for her optimism. It wasn't always easy to stay hopeful, especially when the enemy seemed so powerful, so relentless. But Lyra had a way of making everything seem possible. Her strength, her belief in their cause, had become a guiding light for all of them. Even Naya, who had once seen everything as a grand adventure, was beginning to understand the gravity of their mission. She had grown from a carefree child into a young woman who was learning what it meant to fight for something bigger than herself. Captain Zira had been keeping them busy, pushing forward with the plan to unite as many factions as possible. Every new world they visited, every new group they encountered, added another layer to their growing resistance. Kyle had learned more about the war they were fighting, and he had come to understand the true nature of their enemy. The enemy wasn't just a physical force. It was a force of destruction, intent on wiping out entire civilizations. It was something they couldn't face alone, and that was why Kyle's role was so important. He wasn't just the leader of a rebellion, he was the symbol of hope, the one who could rally people together. As they continued their journey, Kyle found himself growing more confident in his abilities. He had started to understand how to lead, how to inspire, and how to reach out to others. He had become the person they all relied on, the person who reminded them that there was still good in the universe, that there was still hope. It wasn't about fighting with weapons. It was about fighting with compassion, with unity. One day, as they approached a new planet, Kyle stood on the bridge of the ship, looking out at the green and blue world below. It was a beautiful sight, one that reminded him of Earth, the world he had left behind. But this was not his home. This was the future. This was a place where they could build something new, something that would last. "This is it," Captain Zira said, her voice steady. "We're about to meet with the final group of our allies. After this, we'll be ready to take the fight to them. Are you ready, Kyle?" Kyle turned to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm ready." They landed on the planet, and as Kyle stepped off the ship, he looked around at the faces waiting for them. These were the people who had been waiting for someone to lead them. They were scared, uncertain, but they were ready to fight for their homes, for their families, for their futures. Kyle knew that their fight was just beginning, but for the first time, he felt like he could make a difference. For the first time, he knew that the hope they had been searching for was real. And he was going to help lead them to victory. As Kyle looked up at the sky, the stars no longer seemed so far away. They were within reach. And with the help of the people around him, he knew they could win this war. They could save everything they had fought for. And together they would make the universe a better place.